How's everybody doing today? Great. All right, well, I'm Mike Bean with Passion HR. Before I get started, I just want to tell you 4 quick things about myself. First of all, I love my God, I love my family, I love scouting, and fourthly, I love HR. And hopefully you'll be able to see that through my presentation. But just real quickly, give you a little history. Being here and standing exactly right here, the last time I was here, I was speaking to a room with probably 3 times as many people. And I was speaking here to say goodbye, okay? I spent 8 years as the Chief HR Officer here at Hudson Alpha. I was able to help get it off the ground, and this place is one of my second loves. This is a wonderful place just to see how Hudson Alpha is doing genetic research as well as building a new industry in North Alabama. So I just kudos to Hudson Alpha for what they're doing. But like Vicki said, I have about 25 years experience in the HR management leadership role, and manufacturing, steel, chemical, automotive, biotechnology, textile, you name it, I've done it. And so when I was here at Hudson Alpha, you know, we have the nonprofit research and then you have the for-profit associate companies. And when I got here, there were 5 companies. Today, I found out when I left, there's about 34. So they've grown exponentially. But what would happen is a lot of those small business owners would, you know, they just wanted bench space to do research. And all of a sudden, they'd get some funding or they'd get a grant and they'd start to hire people. And next thing I know, who would they hire? They'd hire their friends. And about 6 months down the road, they'd be, Mike, I got a question. I got a problem. What do I do? I'm like, don't always hire your friend. You know, it's the first thing. But anyhow, they would just have business questions related to HR, and so I would just sort of help them and counsel them and coach them. And so that's how I sort of got involved with saying, hey, I can do something myself. And so a year and a half ago, April 16, I turned 50. Most guys, when they turn 50, so the saying is you go buy a sports car, you chase a young girl. For me, when I turned 50, I started teaching at UAH in Athens State, career change, started a Passion HR consulting, and my wife knows about it all, so I'm really happy about that. So anyhow, so I've been doing this for about 15 months, and I've learned a lot. First things first was, okay, what do I do? You know, I know what I want to do, but how do I do it correctly? So I knew I wanted to incorporate. I know, somebody said, oh, you gotta have a business license, and somebody said, you have liability insurance. I'm like, well, I hadn't thought about that. I've never really had to have it before because my employer protected me. So I had to go out and get some E&O insurance and just doing the things I needed to do to protect myself and to get my company off the ground. And so a lot of it, when I left, I had one client and just started building from there, and you know, probably went about 3 or 4 months, like most of y'all, without paying myself, okay? And all of a sudden, things got to a point where I could start paying myself, and thankfully, I've been able to do that every single month since then, and things have really started to grow a little bit, and so I was able to bring on an associate consultant, and Vicki helps me. She's here today. She helps me with the clients that we serve, and then I have 2 other part-time employees. And so this little thing that was once an idea that was based upon my passion for HR, and hence my company name, is sort of growing, so I can feel the pain. You know, it's a 60-plus hour a week job, and I wouldn't trade it for anything, you know, much like you. So that's just sort of how I came to where I am in my business. But through my travels of being in HR and working with clients, I've come to find out there's a few things that, as business owners, that's common. And when it comes to the people side, we all make mistakes, okay? So I thought we would just sort of talk about the top 5 small business HR mistakes. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And you hit the lights, and hopefully that'll do that. So we all make mistakes. Raise your hand if you made a mistake in your business. Okay, yeah, okay. So we're not alone. So sometimes it's mistakes, and sometimes it's like, oops, I forgot to do that, or oops, I forgot to communicate that, or, you know, sometimes from an HR perspective, we do the things we need to do to protect ourselves, okay? You know, Any company I've ever worked for, you know, part of the HR role was to prevent litigious liability on behalf of the employer. So I wanted to make sure we did the right thing, because the last thing I ever wanted to do when I worked at Hudson Alpha or any other places, I didn't want to hand the checkbook over to a former employee for a wrongful, you know, HR mistake or, you know, wrongful discharge or anything like that. And so a lot of times the question that I get is, Mike, I don't know where to start. I just don't know where to start. So about half the clients that we serve are large employers, you know, 250 to 1,200 employees, and they have an HR presence, okay? So typically they'll call us and we'll just do specific HR projects because their bandwidth's maxed out. And so we'll just do some compensation analysis and job descriptions or just whatever they need for us to do. But then the other half are small employers like myself and maybe like you, to where they don't know where to begin, okay? And so typically we start with, do you have a federal labor law poster, okay? And so make sure you have that, and then we start going off just a little checklist of things that they need to do. So some of my clients, it's like, hey, I need benefits. Mike, can you help me hire somebody? I don't know how to write an offer letter. I don't even know how to interview. Oh, I guess I need a handbook, or, you know, if I'm going to keep people and recruit people, maybe I need benefits. Can you help me set up benefits? So it varies from a lot of different things. So we're going to sort of talk about some of the things that I've come across, and maybe you can identify with all these. Okay, so these are the top 5 business mistakes that, HR mistakes that most companies, small or large, make. But first of all, hiring in haste, okay? Second is no employee handbook. Thirdly, which is a biggie, is improper pay practices. Fourth, missing or incomplete employee records. And fifth, terminating in the heat of the moment. Boy, we got some stories about that. Okay, so first of all, hiring in haste. Hiring is one of the most important decisions a business can make and one of the most time-consuming activities, okay? You would be amazed at how people don't properly know how to hire. And my suggestion to you is, if you're going to hire somebody and you're going to do it the right way, first place to start is determine what you want, okay, in a candidate. And how do you determine that? First thing you want to make sure you have is a job description, okay? Because you want to be able to hire somebody related to their skills, knowledge, and ability that the position has. And then you hire from that. And then you may have specific things related to your company culture, your mission and vision, and the values that you want to espouse, as well as characteristics that you're looking for within that position. But I can strongly say, make sure you have a job description, okay? You know, because a misstep can have a negative impact on the morale of an organization. There's no doubt in my mind. I hired an employee once, and it was probably 15 years ago, and we hired him, and first day after doing his onboarding, he came in and he wouldn't talk to any female employees. It was the weirdest thing. And if he was walking down, if a lady was walking down the hallway, he would walk and he'd put his back sideways and walk sideways to him. We're like, what is going on with this guy? You know, I mean, we want him to be part of a team, and, you know, teams are multicultural and they're generational, as well as, you know, a various sex, because we operate in a business world like that. So it was just something odd, and so it was affecting the morale and the impact of that department. So you just want to make sure that you are doing, you know, not hiring in haste. So you do a proper background check. You know, that you're checking references, and if you need to do, you know, utilize a service to do, you know, criminal background check based upon your industry, you know, Fair Credit Reporting Act, you can do that. There are companies out there where you can go and get all that information to make sure that you're protecting yourself because you're hiring the right person. Okay, so I told you about creating a job description, very, very important, and then creating pre-screening questions. So nowadays, how do most people hire? They hire using an applicant tracking system. My company, we have an applicant tracking system. We do the exact same thing. And so the company will say, hey, Mike, can you help hire somebody? And we'll say, well, let's weed out some of the noise that happens when people just apply for everything. So, you can ask pre-screening questions so you save time, effort, and energy so you're interviewing the right people. So that's very, very important to do. Okay. Secondly is not having employee policies or handbook. Okay. A handbook is just a valuable tool to communicate policies, regulations, and benefits. It's sort of like a roadmap of, hey, this is what's expected of you while you're employed with us. And if you do, it's general information, but also included in it is, hey, if you have some issues, this is the process of doing it. As well as if you mess up in something, you've documented to protect yourself. Hey, we have a step process of, maybe it's a process improvement plan because somebody's not doing their job correctly. So you communicate in policies, progressive discipline, how you terminate, what your hiring process is, and sometimes you have to put legal obligations. A lot of times handbooks will have just an overview of your benefits. It's not specific, but just to let people know. It'll also have, emergency evacuation procedures, what happens if you have an injury, what happens, if, you communicate employment status, things of that nature that you put into a handbook. And so it does satisfy some regulatory requirements, and it serves as a central source of information, guidelines, expectations, and procedures. So if you don't have one, happy to help you put one together. They're relatively easy, but you want it to be specific to your company. You just don't want to download one off the internet, okay? A lot of times people ask, well, what do I put in it? What do I put in an employee handbook? Obviously nowadays, code of conduct, making sure your employees create an expectation of how you want them to behave and what is ethical, what is non-ethical. We get a lot of those questions nowadays as far as what is expected of an employee. You also always want to communicate, especially in the state of Alabama, that you're in at-will employment. So what does at-will means? It means at any time an employee can leave the organization because it's at-will. Maybe they got a better job or they just don't like it and they quit. So they can terminate the employment process with us as an employer, but you as an employer can also terminate the employment agreement with the employee. But I would tell you that in this day and age, you better have a pretty good reason. Even if it's within the 90-day probationary period, you need to be able to document and say, this is why we're letting you go. Okay? Very, very important to have that. May want to have a communications policy, an IT policy. We have all this technology floating around and, want to be able to communicate what is acceptable in emails, how employee files are handled, as well as identifying social media. Some employers restrict it. A lot of government contractors restrict it. A lot of people do allow it. But how does it impact the productivity or the engagement of the employee throughout the day in their job? A non-discrimination policy, as well as compensation and benefits and employment and termination guidelines. It's very, very important. Some of just the general things to have within a handbook. Thirdly, improper pay classifications. A lot of times people say, I did not know that there was an improper pay classification. You probably heard a lot about this last year, and when the Department of Labor was wanting to redefine an exempt employee, under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So a lot of people did not know the difference between an hourly employee, a salaried employee, as well as maybe a salaried non-exempt employee, as some of the definitions by the Department of Labor. So when you improperly classify somebody and you recognize it, you have to go back and correct the problem. And it can be very costly to an employer. So it's very, very important that you make sure you know the positions that you have based upon the duties that they do, based upon the salary. Those are the two main determinations when it comes to identifying an exempt versus non-exempt, or an exempt versus hourly position. What are the duties they perform? Do they lead or guide, make business decisions? Do they lead others? As well as what's their rate of pay? Because if it's above a certain amount, they can be considered to be exempt. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, exempt employees versus non-exempt employees. So a lot of times you're always comparing the salary, it's paid on an hourly basis versus non-exempt. You have to pay an hourly wage and you have to pay overtime. About 2 weeks ago, we were with a client and we were doing, we offer a free HR audit checklist to potential clients, and we started talking about the pay grade classification. And they said, yeah, we have hourly employees. Our maintenance employees are hourly. I said, well, do you pay them overtime? They said, yeah, we pay them overtime when they work Saturday. I said, well, do they work overtime Monday through Friday? They said, yeah, sometimes they work 10 hours a day on Tuesday, and maybe it depends upon what's coming in. And I sort of grimaced and I said, well, you need to be paying them overtime for anything that they work over 40. So you have to add up all their hours throughout the course of the week. And if it's 50 hours, you have to pay them 10 hours of time and a half, not just 1 day a week. So their response was, well, our accountant said we didn't have to pay them overtime. And, so I said, well, you may want to rethink that, because there's, under the Alabama Wage and Hour Law Division, you have to pay for anything over 40. So it was just it was a wake-up call for them. And so I just caution you on making sure you understand your pay classification. So a lot of times it's based upon salary, wage, and job position and the decisions that they make. Just a good general rule when it comes to job position. An exempt employee, if you have a 4-year degree, you're just about always going to be an exempt employee, okay? If you don't have one, if you have an associate's degree, you could be, or maybe you're going to be maybe a salaried non-exempt, meaning you get a salary, but if you work overtime, you have to pay overtime. As opposed to an hourly, they make no, they're just following instructions from somebody else, and they're performing maybe in a production line, in a maintenance position, or something like that. So just, we can go into more depth. It takes a lot of time to talk about this. Okay, fourth thing we want to talk about is missing or incomplete employee files or records. Employee file creates a story, a history of from start to finish of an employee that works for you. And I cannot tell you how many times that comes into play when it's when there's an issue to be addressed. So it starts with, if you get somebody's resume and they fill out an application and you have an offer letter extended to them, that needs to be put in that's the basis of starting an employee file. Let alone if they have a change of status where they get a promotion or they get a change of rate of pay or something like that. You want to be able to document that so you can tell the history of what they've done throughout your organization. An employee file also holds benefit information, any training certifications that they have. If you have policy specific, like an employee handbook or a change of status form, you have a non-discrimination policy or an intellectual property policy, you want to make sure you have a copy of that on file, okay? A lot of times it's paper copy, but technology nowadays, you can go to electronic paperless employee files as well. So just want to make sure you're doing what you need to do to create a trail, a history of the performance. So if you do annual performance appraisals, that needs to be in there, okay? If you have medical information, let's say somebody applies for FMLA, somebody also has a workers' comp injury, that's personal health information, so that has to be filed in a separate area, because managers, people that have access to this file, they don't need to know personal information, okay? Personal health, that has no bearing on an employment decision. So that goes in a separate file. If you have I-9 forms, those need to go into separate files. And if you're a government contractor and you allow people to self-identify, that probably needs to go in a different, because they're identifying, race, ethnicity, as well as any physical limitations that they have in performing the job. So just some things we'll talk about that you'll need to know. But and I have a story to share with you, but this is just quickly to tell you on employee files. Medical FMLA documentation, you want to keep that separate. Job application information, offer letters, and change of status, that goes in another employee file. And then maybe you want to have a separate binder for your I-9 information, which has Social Security. Typically it has passport information, Social Security, driver's license, birth certificate information, and then self-identification forms. So those are just some things as you're setting up employees and setting up files correctly you want to have in place. Okay. I do want to tell you a story about the importance of employee files. Real quickly, I worked for a company once and the president came in and said, I want to get rid of so-and-so. I want to get rid of somebody. And I said, okay, well, tell me what happened. They told me what happened. I go over to the employee's file and open up, and it's clean as a whistle. There's nothing in there whatsoever, okay? And so I told the president, I said, I just can't hand the checkbook over to a guy that there's nothing documented. You know, there's been no effort of a performance problem. I can't support this termination. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll help document this incident, and if what you're telling me is correct, within 6 months, other things will happen, and he'll be out the door in 6 months. And that's what we did. And that employee stayed with us for an additional 5 years, okay? So all that to say is very, very important to make sure you have proper documentation, okay? This is a biggie, and this goes back to the employee records files, is terminating at the heat of the moment. I can't tell you so many times this happens. People, it's just sort of a knee-jerk reaction. You know, so-and-so made me mad. They don't need to be here, and they don't know all the facts. So typically, before you terminate somebody, you want to make sure you do a proper investigation to make sure there's grounds to do it. Okay. You want to also make sure that you know, when you terminate, it has a ripple effect on the rest of the organization, because somebody, until you replace that person or you eliminate that position, it's a burden on someone else. So, you know, just understand termination impacts other people on your team. But, you know, typically when you terminate somebody, they may or may not be eligible for unemployment. And so that impacts, you know, your unemployment compensation rate. So it's very, very important that you have proper documentation, that you're just not hiring for this, terminating for the sake of terminating. You want to make sure there's a process in place of you checked all the boxes, you know, to verify that they do properly need to be terminated, because sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And, you know, every termination is specific to the situation, okay? You have a policy and the procedure says this is what we're going to do, but also understand it impacts people. We terminated somebody about 20 years ago, my former boss and myself, and when we terminated, the guy kept saying, you're taking away my livelihood. You're taking away my livelihood. And he was a problem employee. He was creating a hostile work environment where he was, but all he could say is we're taking away his livelihood. And it got a little contentious to where other people, law enforcement, had to get involved in this termination. But all that to say is just be careful before you terminate. I have a lot of clients that call me and they don't know how to terminate. And so they'll ask me to help write an investigation. They'll actually ask me to help sit in, and I'll coach business owners on how to terminate, because I'm just a consultant. I don't need to be doing the termination because they don't report to me. But I also give them advice on how to do it correctly. So make sure you know what to do that. Over here, I have some resources on some things that Passion HR can do for you, and take a look at those. And then I also have something else here that I just wanted to share with you real quickly. You can get the lights. Doesn't matter what size employer you are. If you have more than one employee, you have to abide by federal labor law guidelines, okay? So we have put together, it's a 4-sheet page, and if you have more than one employee, you basically have to abide by about 20 federal laws. And then the next level is if you have 11 employees or more, there's another couple laws you have to abide by, and if you have 15 or more, there's probably you add another more. The big number when it comes to federal labor law and abiding by them is 50. 50 and above, you're considered a larger employer, and you have to have like a FMLA policy. You have to have, and when you hit 100, you have to do the new EEO-1 reporting. You have to have an affirmative action plan if you're a government contractor. So if you deal with the government, on the very last page, we listed federal labor laws that are specific to a government contractor. So this is just a free resource as well that's over here on the cabinet if you would like to get some additional information. But I'll be around to answer any questions. So if we can do anything for you, happy to do that. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you.